Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a Monday episode of Conversations with Coach. And no, you're not imagining things. It is definitely still Monday, and your week has not just sped up extra. I wanted to come on today to have this conversation in light of the passing of Chelsea Christie. Over the weekend, we learned of her death, and it really hit home with me. And I thought this would just be a great opportunity to bring this subject to conversations with Coach. Mental health has fortunately not stayed in the shadows since COVID has come upon us. However, I do feel like it is a topic that can never have the forefront like it deserves. And I'm just going to ask you to take the moment to whatever platform you are watching Conversations with Coach on today. If you would just take the moment to hit the share button and to share it, copy the link, send it to family, friends who you might think would definitely benefit from listening to this conversation. I would definitely appreciate you all sharing it with them. The more you can have them to join in, the better. And I'm also going to ask you, as the conversation continues, that you would, if you feel so inclined, to offer your comments in the comment section, and we can just have a dialogue. As you all know, through those of you who have been following me and participating in my conversations with Coach, I typically will bring on a guest and we have dialogue with the special guest. This evening, I'm going to be having this conversation alone by myself, and I'm going to be sharing with you just some of my personal experiences with mental health and just some of the things that I have personally have found out about mental health through personal experience, through family. So this is a serious conversation that we're going to be having. I want to also say, as a certified personal development and mindset coach, just set the stage in the very beginning. There is a distinction in terms of what I am able to do and what a licensed counselor and therapist is able to do. This is outside of my realm. I do not coach anyone on mental health. I myself have my own counselors and therapists that I see, and it's just for that, to make sure that they are a part of my wellness team. If you all remember a few episodes back when I had Robin May on with me, she actually is a licensed therapist as well as a certified coach, and she so eloquently talked about the need for both and how she balances her career as both a licensed therapist and a certified coach. And so again, I appreciate you, those of you who are sharing and inviting others to join us. Please continue to do that throughout this conversation. Normally, I limit my conversations to 30 minutes, and today I want to be mindful of your time, but I'm not going to put a limit on it, especially if the conversation within the chat is one that would dictate that we go a little bit longer. I'm open to going a little bit longer, but I do appreciate you all joining in and listening and offering your support. To start off, the question begs, what is mental health? And even in my own, when I did the post within my social media, in large part, I would say 99% of those who responded were very supportive, encouraging, and just like me, devastated to learn that someone at 30 years, just beginning their life, found themselves in that position. And then there's always going to be those who are going to have and feel the need to express so on social media that question it or are going to have something negative to say. Just to bring some clarity around what mental health is, and so that this conversation has some context, I will again go and refer to those who are in this field. This is not my definition of it. I'm giving you the definition as it relates to what mentalhealth.gov is saying that it is. And it is defined as, or they define it as, including our emotional, psychological, and social well being. And it affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act. And there are groupings of mental health disorders. And I think sometimes when we hear the word disorder, that's what brings that negative connotation, that negative stigmatism to it. However, if I can help anyone become more comfortable than uncomfortable with the word disorder, anything that is out of order is a disorder. It would be no more than us thinking about, say, for instance, if we had a particular appliance in our home that wasn't working, we would say, oh, that's the machine is out of order. We would put a sign on the front of the machine saying out of order. That's disorder. But we don't think of it in terms of, but when it comes to our own personal being, that's when everyone wants to put up the hands and or they want to look at them with the side eye of like, let's stay away from them. It's kind of like equated in biblical times that they were summoned to a separate area away from other people as because they had something that was contagious. And so when we look at the different types of things that get grouped under mental disorder, mood disorders such as depression or being bipolar, anxiety disorders, personality disorders. Then the more extreme of what we look at in terms of psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia, eating disorders where we're not eating enough or we eat too much or things that are out of balance. There are trauma-related disorders, such as post-traumatic stress disorder. And we're more familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder when we think of those who have come back from the military, who have fought in wars, or sometimes we don't even think about those who work in the medical field, in the ER, they too suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. When you see something happening over and over and over again, it works in your psyche. That's just not how we're wired to be able to see that over and over and it not affect us on a mental level. There is also substance abuse disorder. And so I'm just wanting to bring context to the definition of mental health. And when we think of our mental health, we think of it in terms of exactly like the rest of our physical health. It's just like that. We don't want our heart to be not well. We go to the doctor for that when our heart's not well, when our stomach's out of order, when any other organ in our body, it's not functioning to the perfection in which it was created to function, we go to a specialist to get that treated. However, when it comes to our mind, when it comes to our mental state, all of a sudden, there is this shame that clouds over the fact that anyone would want to go and seek help. And especially in my community, it has, from the time that we were young and we were growing up, it was just this thing of boys don't cry, just all of these things. And they meant well, and they were trying to make us be tough and all of that. But the damage that that did to us mentally, we're seeing some of the effects of that. in terms of dealing with all of the social things that have now come to light that the pandemic has helped to pull that scab off of, mentally, our mind can only take so much. And then when we go to seek help or we ask to go and seek help about it, those around us who don't understand that it's just as normal to go and get our mental health checked out as it is to get our teeth cleaned, as it is to get our eyes checked, as it is to keep our heart operating so that and our lungs operating, all of that. We have to change our viewpoint of mental health, that it's not the shame, it's not saying that we are less than a person, because we want to go and make sure that our mental health is sound and it's proper so that we can balance the life and the world in which we live in. To bring this a little bit more personal for me, and why this is so near, and why it's hitting me and just so personal on a personal level. A lot of times when people are looking, and I'm guilty of this too, when we're scrolling on social media, or when we're sitting and seeing people's lives, and when we're sitting and seeing the smiles on their face, or when we're seeing them functioning every day and what seemingly is that they have a successful life, we tend to do the proverbial judging the book by its cover. We tend to think, oh, well, they have it. What sort of problems could they have? They have it all together. The package on the outside looks great. They couldn't possibly be going through anything that we would deem would fall under the mental health category. Of what I just read off to you falls under the mental health category. Well, you would be surprised to learn that I've battled eating disorders, and that it is a constant battle. So that falls under me viewing my body image and being have a distorted body image perception of myself. Yes, I do. That falls under mental disorder. It even goes further that 11 years ago, I went through a life change that was completely devastating for me. Now, for others, it might not have affected them the same exact way. And on the outside, if you would have asked most people who knew me, they would have described me as being this very strong, independent, say what's on her mind, no nonsense type of woman. When that life change event hit my life, I was not that individual. I was an individual who had lost her voice, literally lost her voice to be able to speak up for herself. And when lost my confidence, I wasn't this confidence coach that you see in front of you right now. That wasn't who I was 11 years ago. And because of circumstances and situations that had taken place prior to the life event. And so when the life event hit me, it sent me into the deepest depression that I have ever experienced in my entire life. A pain that I have never felt in my life up to that point, and one that I haven't felt since then. Thank God. And the only thing that I could think of each day that I was going through the pain was, I want this to stop. I want this pain to end. There wasn't any amount of medication that I could take or that I was being given that was removing the pain. And I hated for the weekends to come. The weekends were the worst for me. It just The weekends seemed to be the longest 48 hours of my life, and I just was like, gosh, I'll be so glad when Mondays come. And you might say, well, what was so significant about Mondays? Because I could go to work, and I wasn't just sat there to be in my mind about what I was going with. I wasn't alone with myself. Now that's a book title right there, Alone with Myself. I wasn't alone with myself, with my thoughts, with what I was going through. And so one particular weekend, it just all became too much. And I said, the only thing that I know to do to make this end is to end it all. And so the ideation of suicide became very real for me, to the point where I opened up the app on my phone and I completed my will, and I had everything. And yes, were tears flowing? Yes, tears were flowing, because it's the last thing that I wanted to do, but at that particular point in time, it was the only thing that I thought was available to do. Now, having had that personal experience of planning out my suicide, I will tell you, in that moment, everyone in my immediate family was on my thoughts. They were, because there's this idea and this notion that some people have, that people who either choose death by suicide or contemplate death by suicide are selfish people. No, they're not. No, we're not. We are very cognizant of the people whose lives are going to be affected, and it does play that part in there. And we, in our minds, we feel as if the burden of them having to be our constant cheerleaders is going to be lifted from them, because we don't want to be a burden on anyone. So if you've ever thought about that, or if you've ever made that comment about someone who's chosen death by suicide or thought about death by suicide, don't say that anymore. They're not being selfish. It is one of the hardest decisions, and a decision that they have wrestled with, along with all the other things that they're wrestling with, that they've ever had to come to. So as I continued with my plan, I was at the point of execution, and I picked up the phone and called one of my siblings and let her know what she was going to need to do, because after I was successful in my execution, someone was going to, need to know. And she could tell something was wrong. And when I admitted to her what I was getting ready to do, of course, she then was very upset and very scared, because she wasn't anywhere close to me. She was in a whole nother state. And she remained calm, and she talked to me for over an hour. And thankfully she did. And I just kept saying, if I could just make it to Monday till I could get to my therapist, I will be okay. And obviously I made it to Monday, because I'm sitting here talking to you about my experience. And I was in therapy at the time, because obviously I said I needed to get to Monday. And so when I got to the therapist on Monday, you do sign an agreement with your therapist when you're going through therapy that you will not cause harm to yourself. And if you have thoughts of causing harm, that you will let the therapist know. That is your agreement of confidentiality. That is your honest agreement. So before any session starts, that's the question that's always asked. So when the session began, she asked me the question, and then, as in years before, in sessions before, the answer had always been no, there's been no thoughts. Well, that particular one, she asked me the question, since our last session, have you had any thoughts of ending your life? And I said yes. And she looked up and she said, Christina. And of course, I'm crying. And she says, we can't continue with our session. And I said, I'm aware of it. And so at that point, I was sent back to my doctor. And at that point, I'm given choices that I could choose from. So I share that story with you because that was my journey. That was my journey of how far it had gotten for me. and what it took for me to take a very giant step in my road back from my attempt at death by suicide. And so there is, I've had family member, I had a family member who was successful in their attempt at death by suicide. And I've had other family members who, same as I, had suicide ideations. Those of you that are viewing may have had the exact same thing, and you just don't really know how to deal with it. There might be some guilt feelings there. Am I doing enough? How do I get them to go to counseling? And I will tell you this, that I didn't want to be where I was, but I also didn't want to hurt. And so as much as my family wanted to support me, they also knew that it had to be my choice. And they just loved me, they encouraged me, they didn't blame me, they gave me the space, and I wanted to get better. And so that's what I will offer you to help them. I will also share this with you that some of you may know, and some of you, it may be news to you in terms of not uh, not knowing about the semicolon story. So, and the semicolon tattoo. So I have a semicolon tattoo, and I hope that you all can see that. I actually had mine turned, whoops, I'm trying to see it, make it so that you all can see it. But anyway, I had mine turned into a butterfly. And anytime you see someone with a semicolon tattoo, sometimes people get it where I had mine. Sometimes people get it put right behind their ear. They'll have it like down up above their ankle. But what the semicolon is a representative of, the tattoo is a representation of, it is just like the semicolon and punctuation. So we all know a period stands for the end. It's the stop. It means stop right there. Semicolon means to be continued. And so the semicolon tattoo was actually of a daughter whose father actually chose death by suicide. And so she wanted to get the word out to others that there are other options other than death by suicide. So it became her mission and her goal to get that message put out. And so she came up with a tattoo for if you're in trouble, if you need help. And because there was such a negative stigmatism about mental health, that was an outward way to show others that you wanted more, you wanted more help. So it was a semicolon tattoo. Sadly enough for this young lady, she ended up also choosing death by suicide. However, her legacy of the tattoo, of the semicolon tattoo, has lived on. And so when you see someone that has put the semicolon tattoo, it means that they are no longer ashamed of what it was that they thought about doing, and that they're ready to spread the word about mental health. And so when you see someone with that tattoo, and I had mine turned into a butterfly because it signals rebirth as well. Not only is my story to be continued, but I've had a rebirthing of my mind, my perspective as well on mental health. So when you see someone with that tattoo, don't be afraid to approach them and ask them to tell you more about their story, because they want to. When they have put that tattoo in a spot on their person that it can be seen, that's them sharing that, ask me more. You've heard me use language when it refers to suicide, and I think this is very important. Language does matter. And there's a reason why we don't say committed suicide. So when the topic of suicide is in the news and sensationalized media increases risk, it increases risk to many people already vulnerable to suicide. So that's why it's really important that the language used to report tragedies and trends, because that can make all of the difference. So when we consciously choose safe messaging, it helps to reduce the suicide exposure effect. And here's why and how that's important. So when the word committed suicide is used, that's like associated with things like a person committing sin or committing a crime. So for instance, when you hear when others refer to, oh, that person committed suicide, that's like they committed a crime. They didn't do anything to anyone else. It's a choice that they felt like it was no other choice available to them. And so therefore the wording needs to reflect that. I'm going to provide you some word choices instead of. So instead of committed suicide, say died of suicide or death by suicide, which is what I've been very cognizant of saying throughout this live. Instead of successful attempt, say suicide death. Instead of unsuccessful attempt, say suicide attempt. A suicide attempt. Instead of suicide ideator or attempter, person living with suicidal thoughts or behavior. So that's one that I myself, like I was identifying myself and some of my family members as suicide ideators. So a person living with suicidal thoughts or behavior. Instead of completed suicide, it's just okay to say suicide. I know that sounds really hard, and sometimes it's in terms of it being palatable for us. It's okay. It's okay to say suicide. Sometimes people will say, well, they're just being manipulative, or it's their cry for help, or it's a suicidal gesture. Instead of using words like that, just describe the behavior. Simply put, you don't need to put you don't need to toe tag it with something else. You don't need to, just say what it is. Instead of saying, I'm dealing with a suicidal crisis right now, say, I'm working with. The power of words in terms of when you're thinking, when we're dealing with mental health, and specifically when we're dealing with suicide, just please understand language matters when discussing the issue of suicide. It reflects our attitudes, and it influences our attitudes and the attitudes of others, and that words have power and they matter. And the language we choose is an indicator of social injustice, and it has the power to shape our ideas and our feelings in insidious ways. And I hope that that has been helpful. I know I've learned, just in sharing it with you all, I've learned how my language matters in terms of how I share my experiences. You all know that I always do a call to action on my conversations with Coach, and this is not going to be any different. The call to action: if you or anyone you know has thoughts of suicide, has living with suicidal behavior, suicide attempt, recently experienced someone who's died of suicide, there is the National Suicide Hotline. Go ahead and plug this in your phone. It is 800-273-8255, so that you might be able to share that readily with someone. You can also call it as a resource so that you might be able to become more educated. Visit their website. It is a great resource to get more information so that you can also just become more knowledgeable about it and about just other mental health things that are out there. I have a friend who has an organization. It is a nonprofit organization. It is called Silence the Shame. And Silence the Shame, and what they're talking about is silence the shame of mental health and wellness. And what their mission is they exist to empower and educate communities on mental health and wellness. And they want to make a difference. And they're looking for people who want to learn more and get involved. She's actually located in Atlanta, and that is their website and their Instagram handle. And I'm looking forward to having her actually on Conversations with Coach, hopefully in the not so distant future. And I welcome you all to reach out to her. And that way you can actually find out more. You can find out more about her organization. And just, I think the more that we all get involved with mental health, with suicide, and educate ourselves, we can help others, because we'll be resources that they can come to and feel like that they're not alone. Because I know it really helped me when I was going through my crises at the time. And one thing else that I can tell you too is that there will be periods of, you'll have lows, or I have lows. Like I'll still have, sometimes I'll go low in terms of my depression, but I won't ever hit that low again. I know that I won't, because I have the tools to work with. And I know sometimes people might think about, oh, well, does she ever have thoughts of doing that again? I personally don't, because of the work that I've done. I can't speak for others, but I know that I personally haven't had the thoughts of the suicidal thoughts. I haven't had those since that time 11 years ago. And the work is hard. And surrounding myself, my faith plays a lot of that. I have very strong faith, and I had it then, and I still have it now. So I'm not gonna kid you and say, oh, I'm just well without any of that. That's what it takes for me. It takes a combination of a whole bunch of things to stay mentally well. So that's part of my wellness team, is my faith in God, and I surround myself with like-minded people as well. And so that is another resource for you. I appreciate you all so much for coming on and joining me tonight to talk about mental health. And just, I encourage, and thanking you all for sharing this. And as you know, it is going to still stay up on my social media. It's going to stay up on my YouTube channel for you all to share and to reshare. And I look forward to engaging with you all in my comments and for us to talk about it. If you all want to, sometimes on the platforms, it's a little bit more difficult for you all to be open and transparent. Feel free to schedule a call with me. I'd love to talk with you more about it. Or you can hit me up in the DMs. I'll even talk with you there too. But I want you all to be well, and I want you to be well in totality, mentally, emotionally, and physically. And I hope you all have a great rest of your evening. Thank you all for joining me, and good night.